Analog thoughts.
Analog thoughts.
Analog thoughts.
Analog thoughts. Analog thoughts.
Analog thoughts.
Hey, so just off the rip, I was thinking about not doing a podcast episode this week because I'm running short or running low on time. And then I realized I'm not going to skip a podcast about time because it feels like I don't have enough time. I'm just going to do it and it's going to eat up some time, but I'm going to be here. I'm going to stay consistent and keep these episodes coming out weekly. So here I am, making the time for this. Before we get started, I'd like to invite you to do a little exercise. If you can, stop whatever you're doing for just a second. Or at least focus your attention on this for just a minute. I'd like you to think about 3 things you are truly grateful for. And they don't have to be big things. They just have to be 3 things that you're grateful for. Food, family, clean water, having a car, having a house, the opportunity to be heard, or the opportunity to listen. Think of just 3 things. Really think about them for a moment. Now imagine yourself without those 3 things. What does your life look like without those things? Aren't we truly blessed? Welcome to Analog Thoughts. I am your host, Stephen, aka Mount Analogue. And on Analog Thoughts, we explore science, philosophy, history, metaphysics, and so much more. I'm happy you're here, and I'm grateful that you're here, listening. Usually at the beginning of these episodes, I like to do a little life update. I'm actually going to skip that this week because honestly, between the last episode and this episode, I don't really have much to report. I've just had my nose to the proverbial grindstone. I've been writing, I've been doing music, I've been doing some art things and focusing on some art commissions, and I don't have a ton to talk about. Or I don't have a ton that I feel like is worth reporting. My son, Felix, is doing good. We got outside a bunch this week because it's finally starting to get warm. He's stoked about it. I'm stoked about it. Let's go, Mother Nature. Give us that sweet warmth, that sweet sunshine. One last tiny little thing before we get going. Leaving a comment or review on whatever platform you're listening to this on goes a super long way. Also, subscribe or like or whatever button on the thingy is. Click the thingy and do the thingy on the thingy, if you can, because it really helps this podcast get seen. I also have a Patreon where you can get early access to episodes, music, art, and some other things. If you'd like to become a patron, that link will be in the show's notes. So without further ado, let's get into why you came here. Time. And this is such a large topic, and it has so many facets to it. I'm obviously not going to be able to cover everything about time in one episode, but because this is one of the most mind-bending, universe-altering, and downright confusing topics that I've done, but I decided to move forward with doing it. It's the thing you never have enough of when you're late for something, but it's the thing that somehow drags on forever during something that's boring or during something that you don't want to participate in. But it's also something that might not even exist. Some people look at it like a straight line. Some people look at it like a cosmic bowl of spaghetti. And today I'm going to dive into the science, the philosophy, the history, and the weirdness of time. Think of it as kind of a crash course into our perception of this wiggly, strange thing. The first thing I want to talk about is the science of time. According to Einstein's theory of relativity, time isn't just this fixed, universal thing. It's relative. Think of it like if you're chilling in a spaceship that's getting really close to approaching light speed. Time starts to slow down for you compared to someone on Earth. this is called time dilation. So we know because of a bunch of math that Einstein and a bunch of other mathematicians and physicists and people did that time is relative to speed. And the faster we get, the more we experience time in a different way. The faster or slower we go, time acts differently. But Einstein's theory of relativity and time isn't the only theory. It's what a lot of us know, and it's what a lot of us consider to be truth, and it's been intertwined into countless sci-fi stories and countless books and movies and stuff. But there are a bunch of other theories when it comes to time and the way it works inside the universe. There's this one theory called the block universe theory. And it posits that time is actually another dimension, like space. It says that the past, present, and then the future all exist simultaneously. So it says like technically your birth, your death, your first breakup, your every embarrassing moment, every moment you're proud of, everything that it's all happening simultaneously, which is a pretty trippy concept. It's kind of like thinking about time in a way where instead of moving in a straight line, it moves in all directions at once, and every possibility that is or has been in your life is happening simultaneously. And I did a whole episode on the movie Everything Everywhere All at Once, which is a great movie. If you haven't seen it, put it on your list of movies. It's literally my favorite movie. But in that movie, they don't call it the block universe theory, but they talk about this. They talk about this idea that everything that could happen is happening simultaneously at all times. And there's I won't spoil too much of the movie for you, but there's a character in the movie that taps into this idea and uses it to their advantage in a pretty nefarious way. I won't, like I said, I won't say too much if you haven't seen it, but go watch it. And when you do, think about this block universe theory. They touch on way more than just the block universe theory, but anyway, I'm getting kind of sidetracked here. The next thing I want to talk about is the quantum mechanics of time. And I know I talk about quantum mechanics. I have on the last few episodes quite a bit, so I'm not going to get lost in the weeds with scientists and the quantum mechanics of time. But right now, scientists are playing with things like time crystals. And the premise of a time crystal is really is a whole can of worms. But the way a crystal works, a physical crystal, like a quartz crystal or any other crystal, is that it is a manifestation of matter that gets repeated over and over and over and creates a physical structure. That's what we're looking at when we're looking at a crystal. It's this repeating, for lack of a better word, code of material that is going on and on and on and on, replicating itself. The idea of a time crystal, the theoretical idea of a time crystal, and what scientists are trying to make is a sort of controlled, from the way I understand it, is a controlled environment in which time does the same thing, and where they can manipulate particles to do the same, to react in a similar way as a crystal, a physical crystal. It's very out there stuff, and it sounds very sci-fi and made up, but it is a very real set of theories and experiments that scientists are diving into about replicating time over and over and over again. And not the totality of time. God, this is really hard to explain. Like, let's say for instance, you have atoms in a tube, and I'm grossly simplifying this. You have atoms in a tube, and one of the atoms is circling around another atom. Basically, the idea of a time crystal is to replicate that circle over and over and over again to create an experience, kind of like an infinitely existing experience within a vacuum. That's the best I can explain it. There are YouTube videos and articles about time crystals. I'm kind of butchering the idea of it, but in a nutshell, it's glitching time. It's a glitch in the matrix. And they're using quantum physics to create these time conundrums. The next thing I want to talk about is entropy. And entropy is tied into the second law of thermodynamics. This is the idea that the universe is always moving from order to disorder. Entropy is what gives time its direction. It's this so-called arrow of time, and without it, time might just be this jumbled mess that none of us can really make sense of at all. It's kind of trippy because the acknowledgement and the cataloging of the disorder in which the universe is moving forward is what gives us our perception of reality and time in the first place. It is through disorder that we are able, not exclusively through disorder, it's more so looking at disorder with through a reference point that gives us our perception of reality and our perception of time. Without entropy, we wouldn't have this. If everything was just a stagnant state and nothing moved away from being completely ordered, we wouldn't understand reality, or reality would kind of cease to exist. And I bring up entropy because it's kind of the antithesis. It's the direct opposite of the time crystals, of the infinitely repeating time sequence. Entropy would be the other side of the coin, where eventually the universe will disperse. Theoretically, eventually the universe will disperse into a vast system of disorder, or lack of system of disorder. And that's kind of why I bring it up at all. Next, I want to talk about a concept that we've probably most of you have heard about. It's space-time. And this is something that Albert Einstein showed, that space and time are intertwined, and they form this fourth dimensional fabric. And massive objects like planets and stars warp this fabric, creating what we experience as gravity. Think of it like this: like you have a sheet from your bed. You pull the sheet off your bed, and you have everybody hold a corner, and you put a bowling ball in the middle. The sheet is going to bow around the bowling ball. That is the concept in a nutshell. That is space-time. And I bring this whole concept, because time acts differently when you are closer to gravity, and time are intertwined. Space, time, gravity, they're all intertwined. Time is going to act differently when you're at the corners of the sheet than it is when you are closer to the bowling ball. That's why you always hear physicists talk about black holes when you watch science videos and stuff, because black holes are they're super massive, super dense. They're creating gravity on levels that other celestial and interdimensional objects aren't creating. It's like this nexus point of huge gravitational waves and huge gravitational experiences that you're not going to get anywhere else in the universe. That's why physicists are so fascinated with them, because if like by interacting with them and measuring how things react to them, and as much as we can get a glimpse at mechanics that drive theoretical physics, because time is warping in such a way when you get close to black holes that you're not going to get that very much. You're not going to get that in a lab, although we are trying to emulate those scenarios at like CERN, the particle accelerator, and at other labs on Earth. Like there are people who are scientists that are looking to create micro black holes or black holes here on Earth, which sounds insane, but is real. Far above my level of knowledge, far above my pay grade, but they're doing it so that they can look at and examine the properties of what something like that does to energy and to time and to space they're going to rip open a hole in space-time, and they're going to create a portal. I'm super stoked about that. Once the aliens come through the portal, I'm here. The aliens might already be through the portal. Whether they're here or not, I don't know. Whether they're here or not is kind of irrelevant, because if they're here, then they've always been here. They always will be here. Past, present, and future have all intertwined. Every potentiality has manifested simultaneously, and you are one of the interdimensional beings coming through the portal. As they come through the portal, we are one with the interdimensional Time Lords that inhabit our dimension. Let's get into my next topic. We're going to talk about a concept called absolute time. And I know I'm flying through these concepts. That's mostly because there are so many. I could talk for hours on the different perceptions of time and what it means and how it's evolved over time, pun intended. But the next concept, the next thought process, or the next idea about time I want to talk about is absolute time. It's the idea that time is the same everywhere in the universe, no matter what. It's like a giant universal clock that ticks at the same rate for everyone, everywhere, all the time. You can kind of think of it like this. Imagine time as a river flowing at a constant speed. No matter where you are on Earth, in a spaceship, or on a distant planet, that river flows at the same rate. And if you check your watch, it should match everyone else's watch, no matter how fast you're moving or where you are in the universe. And Sir Isaac Newton came up with this idea. The guy who gave us gravity in the first place, and he gave us calculus. Newton thought of time as fixed and unchanging, like a backdrop to the universe. And like I said before, we later have discovered that that concept is incorrect. But why does bringing this whole absolute time up matter? Because Newton's idea of absolute time worked really well for everyday life, for life here on Earth, and how we understand science within our own time framework. Before this concept, we didn't have a way to gauge how things were reacting in a super proficient way. We did. We had clocks before Newton. We had ways of conducting experiments and getting legitimate results, but even though that's not completely accurate, that concept really did a lot for science and did a lot for physics and theoretical physics. But like I said before, Einstein came along eventually and toppled this theory with saying, time can speed up or slow down depending on how fast you're moving or how strong gravity is. So even though Newton's absolute time is a useful approximation of everyday life and the way that time works in everyday life, it wasn't the full picture of the way that time works. Let's move on. Let's kind of shift gears away from the science of time and the way that the scientific community is dissecting time. And let's get a little bit into the philosophy of time. So science is the how of what time is, where it goes, where it starts, where it ends, if it ends, what is it? The philosophy is the why. And when it comes to time, philosophers have been arguing for centuries about whether it's even real. There's this concept called presentism. And this is the idea that only the present moment exists. The past is gone, the future isn't here yet, and all we have is now, the eternal, forever now. And then to also take this concept and give you the flip side of it, there is the concept of eternalism. And eternalism says the past, the present, and the future are all equally real and happening simultaneously. And it's funny because when you really think about both sides of this time coin, whether or not everything in the past, present, and future is existing simultaneously, or if there is an eternal present moment, they're kind of one and the same. If time is only existing at this point, this particular piece of the of existence is all that there is, then it kind of stands to reason that philosophically that present moment is existing continuously throughout time, and that all of the present moments are the culmination of the totality of time. It's a trippy, weird, it's just kind of this trippy, weird paradox. I kind of think of it like in Buddhism, Hinduism, a lot of Eastern philosophies have this concept of the wheel of life where it's like samsara, where you're in a wheel of life, you get reincarnated into a different being depending on how you lived your life. And there is the opportunity to break out of this wheel of samsara. There's this opportunity to end the infinite loop of reincarnation, death, and rebirth, and going through the cycle over and over and over. But the only way that you truly break out of the cycle of rebirth, life, death, and rebirth, the wheel of samsara, is you realize that the wheel isn't something to escape. You become one with it and realize you are the wheel itself, and that the idea of escaping the wheel is just a construct you've created for yourself, and that the only way to truly escape is by embracing the wheel. Just like with time, there's a lot of parallels there with embracing the eternal present moment and accepting that time is the totality of the past, present, and future all at once. I know that's a really weird, I know that's a really weird and big philosophical parallel to draw here, but I think in realizing and accepting that you are the totality of all things and all moments, existing simultaneously as yourself and as the oneness of everything, is kind of the nuts and bolts of how this all works. Anyway, I'm getting hyper lost here. I'm getting hyper lost in the weeds here. Let's get back to the philosophy of time itself rather than the nature of reality. Even though I feel like you can't talk about space-time and not talk about the nature of reality, it's just too big not to bring up the why are we even here in the first place. I personally think there's no reason that we're here. You create your purpose and you drive your experience, and reality is something that you manifest through your actions and your decisions, and that heaven and blessings are all things that are a result of your selfless gifts and selfless decisions and selfless actions. But anyway, let's get back to time. Let's get back to the philosophy of time itself. There was this guy named Henry Bergson who said, time isn't just a bunch of ticks on a clock. It's a flow. It's a lived experience. Time is subjective. It's like the old saying, time flies when you're having fun. And then on the flip side of things, when you're waiting for something, when you're waiting in line at the DMV or you're at a stoplight when you're in a hurry, time takes forever. That's the idea behind Henry Bergson's duration principle, that time acts differently based on your current experience and your current perception of what's happening. So is time even real? Let's take it a little step deeper. Is it a thing or is it a concept? Is it an actual quantifiable substance or system? Some philosophers say that time is just a way for humans to make sense of change. It's just a measurement for decay. So metal, time is nothing but the measurement of decay. Without change or without anything, like I said, if nothing changed, if we did reach this state of perpetual repetition, would time even exist? If there was no point of reference, if everything was a stagnant pool without any ripples, and there was no entropy, if there was no disorder to look at it, would time just stop? And then there's the question within all of this of free will. If the future already exists, as externalism and externalists suggest, that the past already was, the future that is going to exist is already predetermined, are our choices even real? Or are we just following a cosmic script, like actors in a play that we didn't audition for? And this is kind of the concept of fatalism, and it can be understood as the doctrine that whatever will happen in the universe is already unavoidable. There is just an illusion of choice. That everything is predetermined, and I don't like this philosophy. I don't like fatalism because I think there are infinite possibilities and there are infinite timelines, and your choices in the present moment are going to fracture and split the timelines into different ones. I think you have all the choices. Aristotle has argued in the past that time cannot have a beginning on the grounds that in order for time to have a beginning, there must be a first moment of time. And you've probably already guessed, a lot of physicists, a lot of scientists, a lot of really smart people have suggested that the Big Bang is the first moment in time. It's like if you think about drawing a line on a piece of paper, there's some point where your pen has to touch the paper to begin drawing the line. And a lot of physicists say that that is the Big Bang. The Big Bang is the pen touching the paper, beginning to draw the line of time. And to further make our way through the weeds and to further make our way through the weeds and to get more confusing and to really push the envelope with what we're talking about here, I like to bring up a point about the fourth dimension. And I've kind of reduced this concept into a palatable, also pun intended, set of points. So with the fourth dimension, imagine that you are a loaf of bread. Each slice of the loaf represents you at a specific moment in time. Right now, you are one slice. Let's call it the present slice. Yesterday at noon, you were a different slice. And in the year 1900, there are no slices of you because you didn't exist yet. So fourth dimensionalism says that you're not just the you right now, you are the whole loaf of bread. You're made up of all of your slices, the past, present, and future. There are two lanes to this fourth dimensional concept of you being a loaf of bread. The first lane, the first view about this fourth dimension is that it's called the worm view. And that's that you're the entire loaf of bread, all of the slices combined. You're like a worm stretching through time with your past, present, and future all part of one big you. And the second view of this fourth dimensional concept is that you are only the current slice of bread. The other slices, the past and the future, are like different stages of you, but they're not you right now. It's kind of an out there thing. It's like, are you the manifestation of everything you've done and everything you will do? Or are you just you right now? What are you? And how does time work with the concept of you? I was gonna get into time travel a little bit on this episode, but that is a whole can of worms that I feel like needs its own episode. But just for the sake of it, I'm going to talk about a little. I'm going to bring up a couple little tiny things about time travel. If you are in the house of the eternal present, into presentism, into you are just one slice of the loaf, and there is only the present, then time travel as a construct couldn't exist because there is no past, there is no future, there is just the eternal now. So the idea of time travel is null. You aren't going anywhere because there is nowhere else other than the moment you are currently in. But if you could time travel, what would you do? Like if the thing that you did decide to do, the things you did decide to do, what sort of impact would that have on the future? Like let's say I was the guy that invented time travel. I'm not that smart. I never will. But let's say I did. Let's say there's a tangent timeline where I invented time travel because I'm super smart and I made a thing. I made a chamber you can walk into and go back or forward. Let's say a bunch of people started doing it and started creating these tangent timelines because of the decisions they made in the past. And those tangent timelines are shooting off into infinity. And we're getting all these connections. And then those timelines are creating different timelines. And those people in those tangent timelines are starting to time travel, so on and so forth. But let's say I went back in time and then I killed my grandpa, making it to where I never existed. I never invented time travel. And this whole web of tangent timelines, infinite tangent timelines, does it start to just like collapse in on itself? At what point does time travel become, and that's what we see in sci-fi all the time. Whenever people use time travel, there's all these rules that you can't break because you will disrupt the fabric of space-time. You'll destroy time itself. We see it in Back to the Future. It's in the classic The Time Machine story. That's kind of the premise of The Time Machine. You know, he goes back in time, does some stuff, and it alters the course of history so dramatically that what he did was created ridiculous conundrums for himself and his timeline or his tangent timeline. One of my favorite time traveling movies is Terminator 2. Always a big fan. And I think whenever anyone writes these movies or stories or books or whatever, whenever anyone writes these stories about time travel, they have to suspend disbelief and also not really lean too much into what kind of conundrums would occur because there would be so many, so many conundrums. If you went back and sneezed on a butterfly, the whole butterfly effect, conundrum. Anyway, let's get out of time travel. I wanted to talk about just a couple more things before we get into the last segments of the show. I want to pull things out of the philosophical headspace, the trippy, drippy, crazy headspace, and I want to pull them into the tangible reality of things we've done on Earth that are quantifiable. I want to talk about the history of timekeeping. Let's rewind. Ever since humans have been humaning, we have been obsessed with time and keeping track of time, quantifying time. This all started with sundials. And everyone knows what a sundial is. It's the fancy garden decoration that ancient civilizations used to tell time. Oh, look, the shadows over there. It must be wine o'clock. I don't know why these ancient civilizations are British, but whatever. So those are deep. Those are like way, way back. Then we get into these things called water clocks, which is basically an ancient hourglass. It's the same premise as an hourglass with sand, but they would use water. It was basically this cone that you'd fill with water, and at the bottom it would drip. And as it dripped, it would reach these different levels. And based on markings on the side of the cone, you could see what time it was. And then once it was dawn again, you refilled the cone and then started again. And then if we flash forward to the Middle Ages, we've got mechanical clocks with gears and springs and mechanisms on the inside. And they were, the original clocks were super chunk, super huge. They were massive because we just hadn't perfected the simplicity of the clock yet. And then we get into atomic clocks, which are so precise, they only lose a second every 100 million years. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about atomic clocks a little bit later on this episode and how exactly they work. Super fascinating. But here's the real kicker with all this. Even with all of this tech, we're all still slaves to time. Sometimes, or you can be. If you put yourself in that position, you can very easily become a slave to time. And clocks, the way that we've designed clocks now, they intertwine with even the biometric aspects of our lives. Like smart watches are judging you. They're like, hey, did you hit your 10,000 steps? And the way that we interact with time and perceive time has changed so much over time. It's not just anymore. It's not like, hey, we can't miss the sunset. The clock's getting to that point. It's like, hey, are you optimizing every millisecond of your life? Are you being the best, most productive person you can be? A lot of that is tied to clocks and our obsession with time and keeping track of time. And a lot of that is tied to capitalism as well. You go to work from this time to this time. During that time, your time is mine. And I'm going to be dissecting that time in blocks and making sure that every moment you spend working for me, I'm getting every iota of time I can from you. It's really weird. Thanks, capitalism, for corrupting the space-time continuum in a really gross way. And a lot of the way that we perceive time in the West is different from the way that people in indigenous and Eastern traditions view time. They view time more as a cyclical thing rather than a straight line. Rather than the past and present and future, they're looking at like time is going to circle back in on itself. And that's intertwined deeply into their belief systems, that time is this repeating thing, this repeating cycle, and that your life itself is this repeating cycle. It's not something we, on a fundamental level in the West, latch onto as much. Here in the West, I feel like it can feel more like you're racing against the clock because our time has been turned into much more of a commodity and we're not getting it back. And that concept does operate abroad. I'm not saying like other cultures and societies don't feel a pressure of time, but I feel like by and large, we feel it more here in the West. And a lot of that, like I said, does come back to capitalism and stuff. Time has been so commodified. We're always trying to save time or spend time or kill time or turn time, time is money. And the irony with this concept, the irony with all of this is that the more that we try to control time, the more the time actually controls us. So the next time that you are stressed out about being late or not finishing a project or not getting somewhere or something done, whenever time feels like it's not on your side, it can help to remember that time is a silly social construct. It doesn't speed things up, and it doesn't necessarily help you complete whatever you're trying to do, but it can help you feel better about time, knowing that it's just something we've made up. Really, or at least our perception. There are so many different ways to look at time, and that this commodified essence of time is probably the silliest one. And that's why a lot of the time, I like to encourage people who feel stressed out and feel like they don't have enough time to practice meditation and or entering altered states of consciousness, whatever meditation looks like for you, however it works for you. Try to get yourself into a mode of pure awareness and try to allow yourself to glimpse into the eternal now. It is really important to tap into that. It's good for clarity, it's good for depression, it's good for empathy. There's something about connecting with the eternal present moment and trying to do it frequently, making a practice out of it that can really change your life. And you don't have to sit, I've said this on the podcast before, but if you're meditating, you don't have to sit in a room with incense and pillows and atmospheric music. You can do it while you are walking. You can do it while you're doing the dishes. You can do it while you are playing with your child. It's a matter of releasing the stress that comes with fixating on things that have already happened or things that are going to happen. It's a matter of being mindful about what you are doing, how you are acting, being mindful about your body, your breath, your intentions. And in doing that, it builds an appreciation for what is directly in front of you and what you can directly affect, what's tangible and what exists. And that kind of goes back to what I was talking about at the very beginning of the show, just gratitude and being thankful for the reality you have and the reality you've created and the blessings that have come from that. I want to get into the second to last segment of the show. This segment of the show is called Let's Ask AI. Let's Ask AI. Today I asked AI, if time travel was possible, what do you think would be the most significant thing to change about the past to alter time in a way that would benefit the future? You can only do one thing. And their response was, if I could only pick one thing to change about the past to alter the future for the better, I would focus on something that addresses a root cause of many global challenges while minimizing unintended consequences. Here's my choice. I would introduce renewable energy technology in the 19th century. What this would do: I would travel back to the early Industrial Revolution and introduce the knowledge and technology for renewable energy sources like solar, wind, and battery. I would share blueprints, scientific principles, and practical applications with key inventors and thinkers of the time, ensuring the technology is accessible and scalable. And then it goes on to say, why this change? Because it would, number one, address climate change in time. It would address climate change early. The Industrial Revolution marked the beginning of fossil fuels, which has led to climate change, pollution, and environmental degradation. Introducing renewable energy early could have prevented much of this damage. Number two, sustainable development. With clean energy as the foundation of industrialization, societies could have developed sustainably, avoiding the resource wars, environmental crises, and health problems caused by fossil fuels. Number three, the economic and social benefits. Renewable energy could use spurred innovation and economic growth without the negative side effects of fossil fuels. It might also have reduced inequality by providing affordable, decentralized energy to developing regions. And number four, minimized unintended consequences. Unlike changes to political or social structures, which could have unpredictable ripple effects, introducing renewable energy is a relatively focused intervention with clear benefits. So I really like that last point there that they made. There are a ton of things you could do that could have side effects, or I guess long-term ramifications that could alter the course of history or it could alter the course of the future in unpredictable ways. You could go back, let's say we went back and shot Hitler. That's great. The Holocaust wouldn't have happened. We would have had all these people that didn't die. But at the same time, would someone have taken Hitler's place that was even worse than him? Maybe. But if we go back and we give solar panels to people, show them how to make them and use them, that yields, statistically, I feel like that would yield a net positive for the progress of humanity. I'm not saying we shouldn't go back and shoot Hitler, because that sounds great. But I'm also saying, like, you have to weigh, if you're going back in time and you only have one choice, you can only do one thing to benefit the totality of humanity. Doing something like this is actually really smart. Giving them some sort of history-altering technology that is going to undoubtedly yield a net positive. I think it's a cool answer. Let's get into the last segment of the show, a segment I like to call Fun Facts. And this is just that. It's a list of fun facts. Our first fun fact is that the Earth's rotation is slowing down. Thanks to the moon's gravitational pull, Earth's rotation is slowing by about 1.7 milliseconds every century. So a day was shorter when dinosaurs roamed the planet. Our next fun fact is that time flies faster as you age. Ever notice how time seems to speed up as you get older? It's not just you. It's called the proportional theory. When you're 5, a year is 20% of your life. When you're 50, it's only 2% of your life. So time feels like it's on fast forward, or goes on fast forward as you age. Our next fun fact is that the oldest known measurement of time is a calendar from around 10,000 years ago, and it was found in Scotland. Basically, it's a bunch of holes in the ground that track the moon's phases. It was something created by ancient humans that were really ahead of their time. Our next fun fact is about the shortest measured unit of time. Scientists have measured the shortest unit of time ever, and it's called a zeptosecond. That's a trillionth of a billionth of a second. So they were able to successfully measure a point 0.0000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000000 And if you blink, you'll have missed a gazillion molecule. And if you blink, you'll have missed a gazillion zeptoseconds. Just a couple more fun facts. This one is that time is stored in atoms. And this is where I said earlier we're going to get a little bit more into atomic clocks. Atomic clocks, which are the most accurate timekeepers we have, measure time by counting the vibrations of atoms. And these atoms tick over 9 billion times per second. And our last fun fact, just kind of a loose, silly one, time perception is warped underwater. Studies show that people perceive time as passing more slowly underwater. This is because the brain processes sensory information differently in unfamiliar environments. So what is time? Is time a river? Is time a loaf of bread? Or is time really just a trick of the mind? Whether we're slicing into moments, or we're stretching time like a worm, or questioning the very existence of time, one thing is certain. Time is the thread that weaves our lives together. It's the reason we rush, it's the reason we pause, and it's the reason that we wonder. And maybe time itself isn't something that we need to be worried about mastering or controlling or understanding. Maybe it's just something to be lived. So as we wrap up this journey through the past, present, and future, Let's just remember that no matter how we measure it, how we bend it, or how we lose track of it, time is ours to fill with meaningful experiences. Like I said at the beginning of the show, don't forget to leave those ratings, those likes, those comments, and reviews, or hit that subscribe button. Whatever the flim-flam on the fling-flang is, feel free to click that and do that. If you'd like to become a member of my Patreon page, there will be a link for that in the show's notes. I'll see everyone next time. But until then, don't forget to check on your mental health, and don't forget to check on the mental health of your loved ones. Bye.
Thoughts. Analog thoughts.
Analog thoughts.
Analog thoughts.
Analog thoughts.
Analog thoughts. Analog thoughts.
Analog thoughts.